Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to the OBX Wave Report for January the 18th. Here we are on this sunny, bright, and beautiful Wednesday here in the Outer Banks, and we're going to talk about some waves, some weather, some climate, some beach lifestyle. But you know what? I'm going to go nuts. I'm going to get a little deep on you guys. I'm, I guess, a little bit of a deep thinker, and I can't help it. And I'm also going to go a little bit off subject, but it'll turn back around to being on subject. So bear with me for a moment. So those of you who have followed my channel know that I play Dungeons and Dragons, and one of the things that I enjoy about Dungeons and Dragons is the creative nature of it, where you can test all these various concepts in this kind of sandbox community of very creative people and in a mostly cooperative fashion, and occasionally it can get a little um, competitive sometimes when various ideas are competing, or when people are competing for time or spotlight. But overall, I really enjoy the cooperative aspect of the game and the thoughtful aspect of the game, and testing notions, ideas, and concepts in a kind of fantasy environment, which is pretty archetypal, right? So last night we had this wonderful game with some friends here in the Outer Banks. A few of them are surfers, and um, I got to test this concept that I've been working on called the Witch of Prophecy, and because I really wanted to get into the notion of this concept of looking forward at the future, and the tension between tragedy and hope, the tension between um, dire consequence potentially, or you know enlightenment, renewal, sustainability. And it's because of this notion of like looking into the future. It's this dualistic thing. It can see it's fearful because the future is unknown and can represent some danger. And but at the same time, it is hopeful because things can get better, and our course of action, our destiny, our destination, our direction, all of those things being related in many ways decide the future, but then there are forces outside of our control. And there's that tension between power, individual choice, what we do, and then the unknown, the forces of nature, the forces of the world. And that's kind of a hard thing because we as human beings, we want comfort, we want certainty, we want this kind of like homeostasis, and the thing that's going to keep us safe and warm and in a good place. um so so playing this character and exploring this concept really kind of brought into focus the like dualistic nature of that. And there was a lot more darkness in it, kind of coming out than I realized, but there was also a lot more hope. And it's this really kind of swingy thing. It's this weird thing. It's hard to categorize, right? Um, and I think that surfing is a lot like that. When you go out into the ocean, there's a lot of unknowns. You have your ability, you have your own personal like scope that you control. You look out into the surf and you can kind of read it. You can see how things are going. You can see the waves, and You have your predictions, your analytical tools, and your internal constant reassessment of what's going on out there. But then there's nature, then there's the unknown, and and then you get out and you try to catch a wave, and when you do catch a wave, you're up on this very dynamic, ever changing, unpredictable thing hurled up out of nature. And there are certain elements of it that are predictable. There are certain things that you understand about waves, and as you get better at surfing, and as you if you're like an expert surfer, you're really good at reading that. But there's always that uncertainty. There's always that random element. There's always that strange event or that consequence that is also a potential. So there's this balance between like you're afraid, the drop in is scary, the ocean can be scary, and at the same time you're in this wonder, you're in this sense of wonder. It's this tension, and surfing is in a way like, heading into the future. I mean, you're heading into the future moment by moment, and it's ever changing. And you're adapting to it as you find your balance, and you turn on the wave, and you do all the things. Um, and then, for us here at the OBX Wave Report, we talk about climate, and climate right now, there's various pathways, there's various choices, there's various destinations and destinies, and that many of them are based on our choice, on our power, on our actions. And then, of course, there's the unknown. There's what we don't know might be coming from nature as we, and I say we, as fossil fuel burning projects us out into a greater and greater period of risk and uncertainty. And then there are those of us who are like saying, look, let's take the destiny, let's take the destination and point it at the most hopeful course. And we can't really control what nature does, but what we can do is control what we do and reduce our risk, and take that line on the wave, that's most likely to get us out, and to have a good ride, and to come out there in exultation, as opposed to getting the beat down and getting slammed, I guess, onto the reefs and sandbars of fortune. So yeah, prophecy in the OBX Wave Report this morning. All right, so thank you for joining me for the OBX Wave Report for January the 18th, where we discuss waves, weather, climate, and beach lifestyle, and all the things, and apparently prophecy too. For today, it's a really beautiful day on tap for today, especially for January. Temperatures are expected to be in the upper 50s to lower 60s across the Outer Banks. Wave heights, nothing too crazy, but definitely rideable. Waves in the range of 2 to 3 feet for most beaches. Warm, sunny, just joyful conditions here at the Outer Banks. So just good stuff right now in the Outer Banks. Looking at NOAA's GeoColor composite satellite, we've got some clouds off to the west here, and to the north and south. So we're kind of in this zone of clearer air. There's another impulse heading toward us from the west, so we could get some stormier conditions in a day or two, but for now, it's just gorgeous out there. And let's go ahead and look at the infrared satellite provided by Tropical Tidbits. Go ahead and check out Tropical Tidbits and follow Levi over there on the Twitters and the Mastodons, and all the places, and get all the great tropical climate information that Levi can provide, because he does provide a lot of good stuff. So what we're seeing now is the last impulse, which brought us a little bit of stormy conditions, nothing too bad. Heading well off the East Coast right now. That was yesterday. We had a little stormy conditions. We got some great footage of some surfers riding beautiful glassy waves down at their Jeanette's Pier. We have this other impulse here in the central US, just north of Texas, running in through Oklahoma and Kansas and, the upper, I guess, plains states here. And then we've got another impulse of stormy weather coming into the West Coast. Looks like California is getting most of a dodge from this one as the center of mass of the storminess is now heading off toward Oregon and Washington. So we're starting to see the respite that the middle to longer term models, weather models, were showing us for California, and all the models right now point for a less stormy, more dry, cooler set of conditions for California for the next week at least, and possibly into the following week, with models maybe starting to point to a return to storminess by late January, early February timeframe. But yay, it does appear that California is finally starting to get that break that we've been talking about now for more than a week. So good stuff. And let's get down to the Outer Banks because this is indeed the OBX wave report. And let's see. Oh, hold on. Before we do that, I do want to talk about some of the predicted trends for stormy conditions. The NOAA quantitative prediction forecast is just a good map generally to understand how much rainfall and snow is expected for the lower 48 here. And but it also gives us a general idea of where the storms are coming. And if you look at the US East, it's going to be stormier according to NOAA and according to the general model analysis. Nothing apparently too crazy in this model, but we do notice a decent amount of storminess over the US South in general, and we'll want to keep an eye on that, especially as we look at the Gulf Coast areas, Gulf Coast states of Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. Hopefully none of the storms coming in will be too tornadic, but lately there's been a tendency for more tornadoes down there. Here off the Outer Banks, you do see that deeper band of precipitation, and that does maybe indicate a potential for some coastal storms to develop. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Nothing too crazy in the models as yet, but maybe a tendency. And then looking west, you've got California kind of drying out. In the past weeks, we'd seen as much as 15 inches of rainfall for weeks, like for multiple weeks in some locations. So 15 inches one week, 15-ish inches another week. This coming week, California is expected to see between 0 and maybe an inch of rain, maybe an inch and a half at most in some locations according to the QPF model. So a much more generally dry California, a much more generally less stormy California in the 1 week forecast here. And then looking at the National Weather Service radar here in the Outer Banks, we've got small craft advisories up, but mostly clear conditions. Most of the weather is out in the central US here, and lots of, looks like, snowy potentials and in the northern and central plains, and then severe weather potentials for Arkansas and Louisiana right now. So that's what we're looking at. Getting down to our local Outer Banks wave report, we're going to go back on up to Jeanette's Pier from using our Google Maps for informational purposes. Go ahead and check out Google Maps for all the things. And then we're going to look at Jeanette's Pier right now. So at present, wave conditions for Jeanette's Pier are in the range of 2 to 3 feet. Waves falling down from yesterday and from the day before, but still rideable in the range of 2 to 3 feet. I expect to see some surfers out there today when I do my daily observation. It's probably going to trend more toward longboardish, but those waves are still rideable. And the primary swell is coming in at 12 seconds with those 2 foot or higher waves, and then the secondary swell coming in at 9 seconds. Winds are out of the west at 16 miles per hour, and that is offshore. So tending to hollow out the waves, tending to make things a little bit glassy. 16 miles per hour is pretty fresh, but it's not too strong. Air temperatures right now at Jeanette's Pier at 49 degrees Fahrenheit. That's expected to warm up throughout the day, and ocean water temperatures are cold and chilly, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a little bit foreboding for me. Please make sure that you have your cold weather gear if you do get out and enjoy the surf today. Weather for today is expected to be partly cloudy with an expected high of 59. In the air, that's pretty warm. Might help to mitigate those colder ocean temperatures. Moving on south, there's some things that we note. There's a sharp dividing line between the colder ocean temperatures in the north and the warmer ocean temperatures in the south, and this is very prevalent today as we look at the observations. I'm going to talk about that more as we get on into Avon. Note that Avon is pretty far to the south. I do want to show you where Avon is. We're up here at Jeanette's Pier. Avon's about 35 miles to the south, maybe a little bit more. And the ocean waters are much warmer. I'm going to talk about that after I get some wave observations. And right now at Avon Pier, the waves are also in the range of 2 to 3 feet. So very similar conditions at Avon Pier when it comes to wave heights. Swells coming in at 12 seconds for the primary swell and 9 seconds for the secondary swell. Essentially identical period for Avon Pier in comparison to Jeanette's Pier. So basically the same period. Winds are out of the west at 18 miles per hour, so pretty fresh offshore breeze. Air temperatures considerably warmer, about 7 degrees in the range of 56 degrees Fahrenheit. And look at that ocean water temperature, fully 10 degrees warmer at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you want to get down into some warmer waters, and it's worth noting that 60 degrees Fahrenheit water is not warm by any stretch of the imagination, but it is much warmer than 50. You only have to travel about 30 to 35 miles to get into that warmer band of water. That get it more of that Gulf Stream influence in the ocean temperatures. So yeah, at Avon Pier, ocean water temperature is ranging around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And for weather conditions, it's expected to be partly cloudy today at Avon with a high of 60 degrees. Much warmer today overall than it has been, and very pleasant conditions. We're going to go on down to Hatteras Island, take that right turn at Buxton, and head on down to Billy Mitchell Airport to get our third observation for today. And at Billy Mitchell, we find that the waves are a solid 3 foot, with the primary swell coming in at 7 seconds and the secondary swell coming in at 11 seconds. Winds are a tick north of due west at 15 miles per hour. And with that south facing shore, that's a slight offshore with a cross shore component in that wind flow. Air temperatures are 56 degrees Fahrenheit down there at the beaches near Billy Mitchell Airport. Ocean water temperatures much, much warmer at 65 degrees Fahrenheit. You're still going to need your cold weather gear, but nowhere near as intense. And it is worth noting that amazing difference in temperature from Jeanette's Pier at 50 degree Fahrenheit ocean water temperature and down at Billy Mitchell with those water temperatures down at 65 degrees, which is just amazing to me. That is just a very high variance in ocean water temperature. Shows you that confluence of the Labrador current sending out a little streamer there from the north, a cold water current, and then the Gulf Stream, that big river of warm water coming up from the south. All right. Yes. And so I was at ocean water temperature. Yes. And then weather conditions at Billy Mitchell are expected to be partly cloudy today with an expected high of also 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that provides you with a rundown of wave conditions presently for the Outer Banks. Let's go ahead and zoom out and take a look at the expected weather that is coming down the pipe for the Outer Banks and then the expected weather that's coming down the pipe for the rest of the US. I'm going to go ahead and just run this model for you. And I want you to note the general progression of storms in the first part of the model. We've got one storm rolling in through mid to late this week, and then early next week we have a storm expected to form and run through by Monday with possible severe weather to the south and east. And I'm just going to go ahead in the model, and you've got those snows up in the northeast. This is what is expected to pump up the surf here for the Outer Banks by early next week. And then we're going to go ahead and run the model again, and we've got this an additional storm starting to form near the Gulf Coast area, and then riding up as a kind of coastal low to the south of the Outer Banks. That's something to possibly keep an eye on. We haven't had too much in the way of crazy coastal lows recently, but yeah, we've had some gales, and it's worth noting that this storm might kick things up a bit by the middle of next week if it does emerge as the model's forecast. Worth noting that at this point, so far out in the models by a week time frame, we can take the forecast with a little bit of a grain of salt. And then by late next week, we've got some general clearing for most of the US as an impulse then tries to form by Friday, but then gets pushed down to the south and into the Gulf and possibly across portions of Florida and southern Texas as huge ridge of high pressure systems settles in. And of course, this is getting well into the forecast. So grain of salt gets larger and larger. And then the high pressures dominate until late January, where they start to melt off a little bit. And then we get some potential for storms running in through California again by late January or early February. I'm going to go ahead and run back the model and then just play it for you so we can look west and see what the expected storm progression is there. We've got a storm right now that's expected to sweep in, mostly impacting Washington and Oregon, possible little impact on Northern California. And then California stays dry in the models for a long period of time throughout most of mid to late January. And as the model progresses, and this is the global forecast system model, into late January, you start to get some impulses off the Pacific again, with some storms starting to progress into Northern California by late January and early February. It's something that we should keep an eye on if California switches back to stormy conditions. For February, we might see a repeat of the extremity that we've seen recently, although worth noting that this progression of storms doesn't look quite as bad at first. I haven't actually, you know what, let's go ahead and pull out to a regional analysis and look at larger North America and see. So yeah, at the end of this model, we still see a high pressure system out here in the Pacific with the storms running up across the northern boundary of the high and then sweeping into the US West Coast. And this is not as intense, generally as intense a pattern as what we saw in late December and in through early to mid January, where there were atmospheric rivers running up north of Hawaii all the way across the Pacific, pointed directly at California, and then these bomb cyclones forming. So the high pressure system is in this portrayal of this predicted portrayal by the global forecast system model would tend to be interrupting any major atmospheric rivers, although there is moisture streaming along the top of this high and then running down into the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. So not as intense by any stretch, at least in this prediction. All right, let's get down to our wave models. I know I was looking at temperature. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Arctic, but before we do that, I want to just talk about predicted waves for the Outer Banks and other locations. First, for the Outer Banks, I'm going to go ahead and run the 5-day model. In the near offshore environment now, waves are ranging about 4 foot. And then for tomorrow, waves are in the near offshore environment expected to drop off, even though the wave models are showing that the near coastal waves are expected to be about the same over the next few days. So running into Thursday, near coastal waves falling off. As we get into Friday with a storm, the swell shifts around to the south and then comes in at around 4 to 5 feet. So possibly some building of wave conditions into Friday. And then into Saturday, waves dropping back down into the 3 to 5 foot range, a slight drop in the near coastal waters. And then into Sunday, excuse me. Sorry, I had to turn off my microphone there for a second. I hope I don't have to sneeze. Let's see. Yep, we still got audio. Okay. Um, I'm trying to suppress a sneeze, which can be fun. Okay. And then into Sunday, we have the waves drop off considerably and likely 1 to 2 foot waves on Sunday. And then by the time we get into Monday, there's another storm predicted, but this model doesn't go out that far. All right. For the West Coast right now, waves are still pretty high with significant wave heights off Los Angeles in the range of 8 to, well, yeah, as you get in closer to shore and some of the south-facing beaches, waves are pretty small. But as you round the point here, the near offshore waves are in the range of 8 feet. And these large storms are still rolling in through the Pacific Northwest and dragging behind them a bit of a swell, although the swell right now is not aimed as tightly at California. Portugal just experienced a large wave event according to the models. Right now, waves off of Nazar are in the range of about 18 to 20 foot significant wave heights, but these are expected to fall down throughout the day. And then let's take a look at some other things. So I did want to show you some features in the models related to, let's see how much. Okay, I did that. And yeah, I can get rid of that. Okay, sorry, I'm looking at some of the maps that I pulled up. So there is one feature at the tail end of the model that I did notice yesterday that is pretty interesting. And what we noticed here is a long stream, kind of river of winds, if you will, running up from the tropics and then into the Arctic. And that's an interesting feature for climate change related fingerprints. It tends to herald warming events for the Arctic and possibly even extreme warming events, although in this particular instance, the warming event doesn't seem as extreme as some that I've observed. Why are we talking about the Arctic in the OBX wave report? Well, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, and Arctic weather right now has had quite a lot of an influence on the Northern Hemisphere, and the changes in the Arctic as far as climate change goes are much more apparent. The Arctic is warming much faster than the rest of the globe, and it's seeing the impacts of climate change driven by fossil fuel burning first. For the Outer Banks, the main things that we're looking at are how the Arctic interacts with weather patterns that move across the temperate regions, because that's where we are. And we're also looking at Greenland to see what are the effects to Greenland as the Arctic warms, because if we get major melt from Greenland, it affects the Gulf Stream, and that affects both weather and water conditions for the Outer Banks. The other region, the other polar region, of course, is Antarctica, and Antarctica is also something that we'll keep an eye on. What happens in Antarctica does not stay in Antarctica, and Antarctica, ironically, is the major driver for global sea level rise in the northern hemisphere, just due to the way that the oceans respond to melt in Antarctica. So the glaciers in Antarctica have a major impact on the health of beaches here in the Outer Banks. So that's just a basic assessment of the polar regions and how they affect the Outer Banks. Here for this week, what we're looking at is a potential big warm up for the Arctic due to these long period winds that are rising up from the south. And this is at the surface. It is worth noting that in the upper atmosphere, the jet stream is starting to develop a big bulge here over the Svalbard region, and that's something to look at as well. The lower level often is affected by the upper level, and when it comes to jet stream, we've tended to see these larger bulges form in the jet stream as the Arctic has warmed. And I want to point you to some of the experts, Dr. Jennifer Francis and Dr. Michael Mann, among others, on that subject, because that's a new area of climate science that can get a little interesting. And so we need to point to our experts there. Okay, so we've got this river of air predicted. This is predicted in the models 5 days from now. And with that river of air, you can tend to see quite a lot of warming in the Arctic. And I just wanted to look at Climate Reanalyzer and see what the 10-day outlook is for the Arctic. And indeed, we do have a bit of a big warm up for the Arctic, particularly in the near Svalbard region. So it does look like a warm air invasion is on tap from the North Atlantic and Europe into the Arctic, and that temperatures are expected to be well above normal for large regions of the Arctic as well. And this is just something that I want to keep an eye on. This is on the right hand side here above my talking head. This is a temperature anomaly map, an average temperature anomaly map over the 10-day period. The anomalies are projected above the 1979 to 2000 base. And here we have some rather warm temperatures predicted. And here are the ranges expected in the general temperature forecast here in this map. And then here you see those winds coming up from the south and heading east of Svalbard and hitting into the Arctic, warmer winds. And then you see the pressure systems that are helping to drive those winds. So I just want to point this out. It's possible that there's going to be a big warm up for the Arctic. Might not be too much of a major event. We'll just have to see. But in any case, weather eye on you, the Arctic, we will keep an eye on things. So in any case, to conclude, for the OBX wave report, waves here are expected to be 2 to 3 feet for from today through Saturday, a drop off in the wave heights on Sunday expected, and then building in through Monday as another storm system is expected to progress and form off the US East Coast. Midterm over the next week and a half to 2 weeks, generally stormy over the US Southeast, but not too crazy, nothing too crazy expected. Possible coastal storms forming off the Outer Banks in the 10 to 14-day time frame. So we'll keep a weather eye out for that. But overall, today is expected to be beautiful. Please go out and enjoy the surf conditions. If you head south, you'll enjoy some warmer water and warmer air temperatures all up and down the Outer Banks today. And as we typically do when we conclude, I'm just going to ask you to please do everything you can to help accelerate the transition to clean energy, which will help to protect our coastlines from the impacts of climate change driven by fossil fuel burning. I know we can do it. I know we can help forge a better destiny for coastal communities and for people both in the United States, in the Outer Banks here, and people on coastlines around the world. The coastlines are precious to us as human beings. We've had a good relationship with coastlines throughout our history, and let's keep it that way. So thank you for joining me again, and I